So we begin with the President of the United States over the weekend. So he spoke at CPAC over the weekend. CPAC is the Conservative Political Action Conference. I spoke there last year. It's a great event. I mean, it's thousands of young people who show up to hear from various members of the conservative movement and the not so conservative movement. It always is an interesting mix because there's every year a controversy over sort of who's the leadership of the conservative movement. Well, the last couple of years, the president has shown up, and the president is very comfortable at CPAC. What I mean by this is that the president will just freewheel. So he gave the longest speech of his presidency at CPAC. Dude went for 2 full hours. 2 hours at CPAC. And it was the full Trump. I mean, it was every aspect of him, the good, the bad, the ugly, the hilarious. And the more you see of him, the more you realize that he just sucks the oxygen out of the room. It's going to be very difficult for any Democrat to compete just with the amount of attention that President Trump gathers around him. And my father made a point one time about Barack Obama. When Obama was early on in his presidency, he said, one of the things about Obama that he's truly great at is making himself ubiquitous. He's on every TV all the time. It feels like he's become a part of our lives. Well, Trump certainly has become a part of the American life. Well, does that mean that it guarantees him re-election? Of course not. Nothing guarantees you re-election. But he is so adept at garnering attention to himself that it makes it difficult to think of anyone else in the race. So maybe the idea is that you're going to vote for somebody else as the default. But let's remember, Americans tend to get pretty comfortable with whomever is in office, or at least relatively comfortable with whomever is in office. Right now, his approval ratings about the same as they were for George W. Bush at this time before his reelection, or Bill Clinton before his reelection, or Ronald Reagan, for that matter, before his reelection. So this idea that he is wildly out of tune with prior winners is simply nonsense. In fact, the only president who had really high reelect numbers at this point was George H.W. Bush, who then went on to lose. It's important to recognize that the American people generally don't like to change horses in the middle of the stream. They really don't. The last president who was a one-term, like a legit one-term president who did not win a second term specifically because of a third-party candidate, didn't lose because of Ross Perot or something, was Jimmy Carter, before I was born. So it's been 40 years since the American people had a legit one-term president like Jimmy Carter. That's a long time. The American people, to overcome that burden, the Democrats are going to have to do better. And again, President Trump is adept at seizing the headlines because he is a barrage. Now, I talk with friends in the news business all the time. And one of the things we are constantly noting about President Trump is that a day in Trump time is like a year in regular time. It used to be that when Barack Obama was president, a day was basically half a news cycle. Now, 1 hour is half a news cycle. The half-life of Trumpism is extraordinarily short. Every 2 hours, there's a new news cycle from the president because he's tweeting something, or something is going on, or the media are so rabid that they generate a controversy, or people reacting to him decide to create a story. Do you remember when Brett Kavanaugh was nominated? You remember that? That was like 3.5, 4 months ago. Okay, that's crazy. That's insane. You remember that Covington High School controversy? That was only about 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. That's how fast time moves in the Trump administration, or rather the news cycle moves in the Trump administration. That means the Democrats are dealing with a flurry from Trump every time he is in public. Well, at the CPAC speech, Nick Gillespie makes this point at Reason.com, Trump demonstrated once again that he is just an overwhelming presence in American politics, with some of the good and some of the bad and some of the ugly. So here is the President of the United States defending his emergency declaration. Now, it is important to note, while the emergency declaration with regard to immigration is not popular among Americans, it isn't by and large, he has not lost approval ratings for it. He's actually gained in the approval ratings. Here's the President talking about the emergency declaration.
Last month, I declared a national emergency. And a lot of people talk about precedent, that if we do this, the Democrats will use national emergency powers for something that we don't want. They're going to do that anyway, folks. The best way to stop that is to make sure that I win the election. We're very concerned about setting precedent. I'm very concerned with having murderers and drug traffickers and drugs and drug cartels pouring into our country. That's what I'm concerned about.
Now, this is a deeply unconservative argument that President Trump is making right there. This idea, well, I can violate the Constitution, I can violate the balance of powers, because eventually Democrats will too. And the best way to prevent Democrats from doing it is to make sure that Republicans keep being reelected. In other words, give the executive branch all the power, and I, Donald Trump, will ensure that that power is used how you like it. Well, that's not how constitutional government is supposed to work, which is why there's a good shot that today the Senate is going to vote down President Trump's national emergency declaration, forcing him to issue the first veto of his presidency. With that said, one of the benefits that President Trump has is that he gets to argue that Democrats are wildly out of the box, uncaring when it comes to the effects of illegal immigration, when it comes to drug smuggling and sex trafficking and crime being brought into the country via the southern border. Now, how are Democrats going to combat this? Are they really going to combat it with the checks and balances argument? Because their own crowd doesn't care about checks and balances. And Barack Obama certainly didn't care about checks and balances. And then President Trump, he always mixes the good with the bad. Then he says something about the emergency declaration that I think is deeply unconstitutional and wrong-headed and bad. And if Barack Obama said it, I'd be livid. And then he says, listen, I'll sign an executive order defending the First Amendment on campuses. So here's the good.
Proud to announce that I will be very soon signing an executive order requiring colleges and universities to support free speech if they want federal research dollars. If they want our dollars and we give it to them by the billions, they've got to allow people like Hayden and many other great young people and old people to speak. Free speech. And if they don't, it will be very costly. That'll be signed very soon.
Okay, well, I'll wait to see what the exact extent of the executive order is. Obviously, you want that to remain within legal boundaries. But the basic idea, which is that college campuses should not be given federal funding if they're not going to protect the First Amendment, that obviously is true. This is the thing with Trump. 1 2-hour speech, 1 million headlines. Then the president does what the president always does. He went after the media coverage of his inauguration crowd size. He went after the Russia stuff. The president is basically a 2-hour comedy routine, and I'm not sure that Democrats can keep up with this, frankly.
At our big inauguration speech, you take a look at those crowds, and I watched one of the evening shows that are ridiculous, how horrible they are, how mean, how horrible. I saw pictures that there were no people. Those pictures were taken hours before. If you say something like, Russia, please, if you can, get us Hillary Clinton's emails. Please, Russia, please. And then that fake CNN and others say, he asked Russia to go get the emails. Horrible. These people are sick, and I'm telling you, they know the game. They know the game. And they play it dirty, dirtier than anybody's ever played the game.
Okay, so listen, again, President Trump is going to have a lot to run against. The fact that the media are constantly supporting his agenda by going over the rails against him. The fact that Democrats are constantly supporting his agenda by inadvertently going too far in the other direction. The fact that the Mueller investigation continues to drag on without any tangible result from it. And here's President Trump going after the Mueller investigation and then ripping on his own attorney general. Again, the guy is a walking comedy show. When it comes to American politics, policy, I'm sorry to say, simply does not matter very much. The question is, which person are you more comfortable with at this point? I'm not sure that people haven't grown comfortable to Trump, seriously. Because at the beginning, it was like, oh my God, what is this? Right? At the beginning, it's like, oh God, he's like your drunk uncle at the party. He's knocking over the barbecue, and now the house is on fire. What the hell is going on? But now it's like, okay, well, the house is on fire, and we put it out, and he's still kind of stumbling around and drinking, but all right, everything's okay. And barbecue's kind of tasty. Guess we can live with that. Here's the president going after the Mueller investigation and his own attorney general, Jeff Sessions. Everything with President Trump becomes old news. Sooner or later, everything is baked into the cake. I know the cake is very large at this point. There's a lot of stuff in there. I know there's rat bones and there's old shoes and stuff, but it's all baked in. We all know what's in the cake. And when it comes to American politics, sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil that you don't, which we'll see in just a second. But anyway, here's President Trump suggesting that people are trying to tear him down with BS, which to a certain extent is certainly true.
We had the greatest election. In all fairness, I used to hear Andrew Jackson. This was now greater than the election of Andrew Jackson. People say that. No, people say it. I'm not saying it. All right? This was the equivalent or greater. Now we have people that lost. And unfortunately, you put the wrong people in a couple of positions, and they leave people for a long time that shouldn't be there. And all of a sudden, they're trying to take you out with bullshit.
Okay. Do Democrats have a response to this? I mean, seriously, they can try to schoolmarm President Trump, and Hillary Clinton tried that in 2016. And school marming him didn't work. You know why? Because people are tired of it. They're just tired of the school marming. You think Kamala Harris school marming President Trump is really going to do anything? Joe Biden school marming President Trump is going to do anything? Really? Like the American people, they know. They like, all right, it's all there. We get it. In a second.